May 14, 1998, Los Angeles, 10:50 p.m. The City of Angels was glittering with the same electric promise it always held, unaware that its greatest voice was about to fall silent forever. In a frantic ambulance racing toward Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, an 82-year-old man was fighting for one last breath, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and final realization. This wasn't just any patient. This was the man who had defined the 20th century, the man who had taught the world how to love, how to lose, and how to stand tall in the wreckage. But in that chaotic moment, stripped of the tuxedo, the spotlight, and the Jack Daniels, Frank Sinatra was facing the one thing he couldn't charm, intimidate, or sing his way out of. What happened in those final minutes, and the whispered words that escaped his lips before the end, would reveal the true human being hidden behind the legend of the chairman of the board. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? To understand the weight of that final night in the ambulance, we have to rewind the tape. We have to go back to the moment the music actually stopped 3 years earlier. It was 1995. Frank had been the engine of American culture for 50 years. He was the man who didn't just sing songs, he inhabited them. But the invincible armor was cracking. During his final concerts, the lyrics, those faithful companions that had served him for decades, began to slip away. He would stand on stage, the orchestra swelling behind him, the crowd leaning in with adoration, and he would see the blank spaces in his mind where the words used to be. For a man whose entire life was built on control and precision, this was a torture worse than physical pain. It was a betrayal by his own mind. He retired not with a bang, but with a quiet, painful retreat. The final concert in Palm Desert wasn't billed as the end, but he knew. The moment he walked off that stage, the silence that followed was deafening. He retreated to his compound in Beverly Hills, and later Malibu, surrounding himself with high walls and private security. The world outside kept spinning. New stars were born, new music was topping the charts. But inside Frank's world, time had begun to warp. He spent his days sitting by the pool, staring at the California sun, perhaps replaying the nights at the Sands, the fountains of Vegas, the clinking glasses with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. But Dean was gone. Sammy was gone. The loneliness of being the last giant standing was a heavy coat to wear. If you love stories that explore the human side of legends, subscribe for new stories, because we are going to dive deep into the heart of the man who lived 1,000 lives in one. The years between 1995 and 1998 were a slow, heartbreaking fade. The press speculated, of course. They printed rumors about his health, about his memory, about his mood. But the truth was far more poignant than any tabloid headline. Frank Sinatra, the man who had snapped his fingers and made waiters, politicians, and mob bosses jump, was now fighting a battle against dementia and heart disease. There were days he was the old Frank, sharp, funny, dangerous. And then there were days when the fog rolled in, and he would look around his living room, filled with trophies and gold records, and struggle to connect the dots. Imagine the frustration of a man who demanded perfection from everyone, suddenly unable to command his own body. His wife, Barbara, became the gatekeeper. She protected his dignity with the ferocity of a lioness. She knew that Frank Sinatra could not be seen weak. The image of the fedora and the trench coat, the glass of whiskey held with 3 fingers, that image had to be preserved at all costs. Friends would call, old acquaintances would try to visit, but the circle was drawn tight. Frank spent hours listening to opera or watching old movies, sometimes seeing his younger self on the screen, skinny, hungry, full of a desperate energy to conquer the world. It must have been a surreal experience, watching that young man from Hoboken and knowing that the fire was finally burning down to embers. But even in the quiet, the fighter was still there. Doctors would say his heart was failing, that his time was short, and Frank would rally. He would pull himself back from the brink, time and time again. He had survived the Depression. He had survived the collapse of his career in the early 50s. He had survived the heartbreak of Ava Gardner. He wasn't going to let go easily. This resilience was his trademark, but it was also his curse. It prolonged the inevitable, stretching out the twilight. It was in these quiet moments that the real Frank emerged. Not the tough guy, not the bully, not the star. Just a man who missed his friends, a man who perhaps regretted the times he had been cruel and cherished the times he had been kind. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the roar of the stadiums he used to command. He had sung My Way thousands of times, turning it into an anthem of defiance. But now, in the stillness of impending death, the lyrics took on a different meaning. And now, the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. It wasn't a song anymore, it was a calendar. The tension in the house grew as 1998 began. The medical emergencies became more frequent. The trips to the hospital were covert operations, designed to keep the paparazzi away. Every time the siren wailed, the fear was that this would be the one. And yet, the world went on, oblivious. We were listening to the radio, going to work, watching the news, unaware that the heartbeat of the 20th century was stuttering. If you are moved by the stories of how great lives conclude, make sure to subscribe for new stories so you don't miss our upcoming documentaries on the icons who shaped our world. Then came May 14th. It started as a Thursday like any other. Frank was at his home in Los Angeles. The day had been relatively peaceful, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in the same bruised purples and oranges that Frank had sung about in the wee small hours of the morning, the atmosphere shifted. He was eating dinner with Barbara. Suddenly, the air left the room. A massive heart attack struck him with the violence of a physical blow. This wasn't a drift into sleep. It was a seizure of the chest, a terrifying constriction. Barbara acted instantly. The call was made. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics worked on him, their hands moving with practiced urgency over the chest of the man who had once owned the world. As they loaded him into the back of the ambulance, Frank was conscious. He was aware. And this is the part that breaks your heart. He wasn't singing. He wasn't cracking jokes. He was scared. The vulnerability of that moment is something we rarely associate with Sinatra. We think of him as bulletproof. But in that ambulance, speeding through the traffic of Los Angeles, sirens wailing against the night, he was just an 82-year-old man who didn't want to leave. They arrived at Cedars-Sinai. The emergency room doors burst open. A team of doctors and nurses swarmed around him. They knew who he was, but in the ER, celebrity means nothing. Physiology is the only law. They hooked him up to monitors. They pushed drugs into his veins. They fought to stabilize a heart that had beaten out the rhythm of American life for 80 years. Barbara was there, holding his hand, urging him to fight. "Fight, Frank, fight," she whispered. She had seen him fight everyone, journalists, studio heads, prosecutors. She knew he had it in him. But Frank looked at her. The blue eyes, clouded by age and pain, found hers. And then he spoke his final words. He didn't quote a song. He didn't make a grand speech. He whispered with a clarity that cut through the chaos of the room. "I'm losing. I'm losing." 2 words. Brutal, honest, accepting. For a man who had made a career out of winning, out of coming back when everyone counted him out, this admission was the ultimate surrender. It wasn't a defeat. It was a realization. The fight was over. At 10:50 p.m., the line on the monitor went flat. The room went silent. Frank Sinatra was gone. Now, before we see how the world reacted to this seismic loss, please subscribe for new stories, because the way the world mourned Frank Sinatra is a story in itself. The news didn't just break. It shattered the night. It started as a ripple, phone calls between insiders, pagers beeping in newsrooms, and then it became a tidal wave. Frank Sinatra is dead. The headline dominated every screen, every paper, every conversation. But the most profound reaction didn't happen in a news studio. It happened in Las Vegas. The city that Frank had helped build, the city of neon and noise, did something it had never done before. The next night, at the peak of the evening, the lights of the Las Vegas Strip were turned off. For 10 minutes, the most luminous street on earth went dark. It was a gesture of respect so massive, so absolute, that it felt biblical. The casinos, the hotels, the marquees, all black. The noise stopped. The gambling stopped. People stood on the sidewalks, looking up at the darkened skyline, holding candles, weeping. It was as if the electricity of the city had died with him. Without Frank, the lights didn't seem to have a purpose anymore. In New York, the Empire State Building turned blue. "Old Blue Eyes is back," they used to say. Now, Old Blue Eyes was gone. Radio stations threw out their playlists and played nothing but Sinatra. For 24 hours, 48 hours, the airwaves of the world were filled with that voice. Rich, baritone, full of cigarette smoke and expensive whiskey. You couldn't walk into a grocery store, a taxi, or a bar without hearing him. It was a global wake. The funeral was held in Beverly Hills. It was the gathering of the century. Gregory Peck, Tony Bennett, Liza Minnelli, Kirk Douglas, Jack Nicholson. The faces of Hollywood, old and new, sat in the pews, looking dazed. They weren't just mourning a friend. They were mourning an era. They were mourning a style, a swagger, a way of living that was disappearing. Frank was the last connection to a world where stars were gods, untouched and untouchable. With him in the casket, that world was officially buried. But there was a moment during the service that captured the essence of it all. When the music started, Frank's music, the heavy atmosphere shifted. "Put your dreams away." The song played, and suddenly, he was there. The voice was more alive than any of the living people in the room. It soared up to the rafters, filling the space with that impossible phrasing, that breath control, that emotion. People smiled through their tears, because they realized something. If you are feeling the weight of this moment, subscribe for new stories, because we believe that understanding the past is the only way to understand ourselves. Frank Sinatra had spent his final years fighting against the dying of the light. He had feared being forgotten. He had feared the silence. But as the funeral procession moved through the streets, thousands of fans lined the roads. They threw flowers. They held signs that said, "We'll never forget you, Frank." They played his songs from boomboxes. It was a celebration, not just a mourning. He was buried in Cathedral City, near Palm Springs, in a simple plot. The man who had owned penthouses and jets and casinos went into the ground like anyone else. But on his tombstone, the family engraved a phrase that became his final message to the world. It wasn't, "I did it my way." It was the title of another one of his songs, a promise, a wink from the afterlife. The best is yet to come. Even in death, he was selling the future. He was telling us that the show wasn't over, that the next set was going to be even better. 9 years later, 10 years later, 25 years later, look around. Is he gone? Not really. You hear him at every wedding when the couple takes the floor. You hear him in the lonely bars at 2 a.m. when "One for My Baby" plays on the jukebox. You hear him in the swagger of modern artists who try to capture even an ounce of his cool. Jay-Z, Justin Timberlake, Michael Bublé, they all bow at the altar of Sinatra. He wrote the playbook on how to be a star. But more than the fame, it's the humanity that lingers. The story of his final night that whispered, "I'm losing," teaches us something profound. It teaches us that even the giants, the kings, the legends are mortal. They fear the dark just like we do. And that makes their art even more precious. Frank sang about loneliness because he knew it. He sang about heartbreak because he lived it. He didn't just act the part, he bled into the microphone. So, when you look at the legacy of Frank Sinatra, don't just see the tuxedo and the glitz. See the man in the ambulance. See the man who fought for every breath because he loved life so desperately. See the man who proved that you can fall, you can crash, you can be written off, and you can still stand up, dust yourself off, and sing the hell out of the next song. Frank Sinatra didn't just live his life, he devoured it. And in doing so, he gave us a soundtrack for our own lives. He taught us that it's okay to have a few regrets, as long as they are too few to mention. He taught us to face the music. And he taught us that when the final curtain falls, the only thing that matters is that you stood tall and took the blows. The lights of Las Vegas came back on eventually. The world kept turning. But the glow is a little different now. It's a little softer, a little more nostalgic, because we know that we will never see his like again. The voice is silent, but the echo will last forever. Thank you for watching this story. If you want to keep the memory of true legends alive, hit that like button and subscribe for new stories. We have so many more tales to tell, and we want you to be part of this journey. Until next time, keep listening to the music and live every day your way.